There have been some interesting reports this week about the NFL owners and the NFLPA engaging in discussions about the next collective bargaining agreement, even though the current one has nearly 2 years remaining. This is from a Pro Football Rumors article that cites Dan Graziano as the source of information. There's been a lot of talk over the past year about the league's CBA and the potential for a work stoppage. Owners are widely seen as having won the last round of negotiations, and players will be making much stronger demands this time around. Many believe the owners won't be willing to meet those demands, which could cause another lockout. This is consistent with a lot of reports I had read over the past year or two, indicating that we could be in for another contentious round of bargaining like we saw in the 2009 to 2011 time period that included a lockout of the players by NFL owners. But the two sides apparently made some progress in their first round of negotiating meetings earlier this week, according to Dan Graziano of ESPN.com, Twitter link. Graziano writes that people involved in the negotiations believe the owners would like to get a new deal in place prior to the start of the 2019 season. Wow, hold on. Did he say, prior to the start of the 2019 season? That's the first time I've heard that suggested. Graziano's tweet is saying that the NFL owners and the NFLPA could hammer out a new collective bargaining agreement in the next 4.5 months. It's hard to imagine, but I'd be hugely in favor of such an outcome. In a separate tweet, Graziano notes that the fact they're making progress with this far to go is a positive sign. The current CBA runs through the 2020 season, so we're still a ways out. They're engaging the players in talks with 2 seasons left, which indicates a possibility, though not a certainty, that this could be done without a work stoppage. Graziano writes. Again, hard to imagine, but good news if it's accurate. Players are likely to seek significant concessions on issues like the guarantees in contracts, and owners have been unwilling to budge on, in the past. Ultimately, players were unwilling to forego any game checks last time around, and it'll be very interesting to see how far they're willing to go this time. The identified issue in this article is contract guarantees. Ultimately, the players could win the battle but lose the war on this topic, earning a Pyrrhic victory. My thinking is that NFL owners aren't opposed to guaranteed contracts, they are opposed to long-term, high-dollar guaranteed contracts. It would be an easy negotiation for the owners to dig in hard against any guarantees at all, then grudgingly concede guarantees on contracts with limited dollar values or limited years. After all, the league already has guarantees in place for all first-round draft picks, franchise tag players, and others. The NFLPA could walk away with concessions from the owners feeling that they had gotten a partial win, and thinking they'd get more next time around, and have wasted the opportunity to get more meaningful agreement with the owners. So, if I don't think contract guarantees are valuable enough for the NFLPA to plant the flag on behalf of their players, what should the NFLPA be fighting for? Greater benefits for retired players. Redskins legend John Riggins is among those championing the fight for former NFL players. With today's stars becoming multimillionaires, there's a perception that the union has abandoned its former members and left them with benefits that are far less than they should be. Click here to read a summary of benefits for vested active players, non-vested active players, vested former players, and vested former players. Pre-1993, USA Today recently highlighted the battle that former players are fighting, and the difficulty they have in making progress without representation in the collective bargaining agreement discussions. The diesel is still running, with a different purpose. The Super Bowl XVII MVP is revved up about the still persistent quest by retired players from his era to increase their pensions, which pale when compared to more recent retirees and current players. It appears the NFLPA and their constituents are only worried about themselves, and, sorry, guys, just die, will you please? Go away. Riggins, 69, told USA Today Sports during a recent group interview that included his wife, Lisa Marie, and several former teammates. that's kind of the feeling you get. Here's a Groundhog Day effect when it comes to aging ex-players looking for a bigger piece of the NFL pie. They've been at it for decades, in one form or another, frustrated that those who played before the major sea change in the NFL's system occurred in 1993 when liberalized free agency and a salary cap were instituted, are in a markedly lower class for benefits. This, while the most robust sports league in the land continues to grow, with revenues exceeding $14 billion per year. Compare the pension of, say, Hall of Fame guard Joe DeLamielleure, around $30,000 per year, with the $220,000 maximum for similarly vested retirees of Major League Baseball or the NBA who played in the 1970s, and the concerns of the ex-players resonate. But here's the big problem for the pre-93ers, like the last time and multiple times before, they won't have a seat at the bargaining table when the NFL and NFLPA negotiate to extend the current collective bargaining agreement that expires after the 2020 season. One of the important things in appealing to the union and the current players is that they've held themselves out now as social justice warriors, Lisa Marie Reagan said. I think the timing is perfect to make our case. I say to them, look inside your very own house, because there's some justice that can be done. Of course, current players and NFLPA leadership have a different view. When the last CBA was struck in 2011, active players contributed more than any group of players ever to the pre-93 cause, largely through the $620 million legacy fund that was funded jointly with NFL owners. Yet the current players are challenged by a lingering perception that, with salaries that dwarf those of previous generations, they lack empathy for the pioneers. Personally, I'd like to see some percentage of league revenues annually set aside for the benefit of former players to give them more than they get now. Even a small revenue tax of around 0.3 to 0.5% of revenue would provide a meaningful increase in benefit funding for the group of former players. I understand that the NFLPA is organized to represent current players, and that owners are not responsible for the welfare of those who are retired, but we've all seen what often happens to young men in their 20s, many of whom are from impoverished backgrounds, who are lavished with millions of dollars per year. Many end up with no financial security, and the players of today, who are the constituents of the NFLPA, are the former players of tomorrow. Seeking better benefits and funding those benefits retroactively seems to be something worth working towards. For the middle class of players, an analysis done by AP this year found that the 2011 collective bargaining agreement exacerbated the issue of team rosters getting younger. Whatever the cause, the issue appears to be real and deepening. By the time NFL players reach their third and fourth years in the league, the vast majority are struggling just to hang on because of injuries or younger, faster and often cheaper rookies out for their jobs. In 2006 and 2011, the Players Union and the NFL tried to do something about that, adopting salary and bookkeeping rules with the potential to extend the careers of these veterans. It hasn't worked. In a first-of-its-kind analysis, the Associated Press found that since 2005, the average amount of playing experience for athletes on the NFL's opening day rosters has shrunk from 4.6 years to 4.3. In 2005, there were 784 players with 3 years experience or less and 714 with 5 or more years. In 2018, the gap widened to 852 and 644. Teams are increasingly made up of a few star millionaires and an army of young players earning close to the minimum salary, with a dwindling number of older, journeyman athletes in the middle. You don't really have a lot of middle-class older guys. It's actually kind of sad. Detroit Lions safety Glover Quinn said. Union leaders argue that they have fought successfully to increase the amount of money going to all players, in part by raising the NFL cap on team payrolls. As the union sees it, where front offices spend that money is their decision. Just as long as they spend it, said Union President Eric Winston, who played for 12 seasons. But how do you address something like that? Do you say, well, let's mandate there are 5 to 10 guys on every roster who have 4 to 7 years experience? Okay, then which guys aren't going to make the roster because of that? The story of ninth-year Seahawks safety Earl Thomas stands as a cautionary tale. Thomas held out through the preseason for a new, cash upfront, long-term contract in case of serious injury. He failed to get what he wanted and played instead under his soon-to-expire contract this year. In the fourth game of the season, he broke his leg. The final image of Thomas on the field was of him giving the finger to his own bench as he was carted off, knowing he almost certainly won't get as big a contract now that he's damaged goods. Mark J. Rebelez, USA Today Sports. In 2006, the minimum salary benefit was added to the collective bargaining agreement to help lower-paid veterans keep playing. It allows teams to sign players in their fifth year and beyond to one-year contracts at the league-mandated minimum for their experience level, while charging less than the full amount against the club's salary cap. For example, a fifth-year player this year would get the league minimum of $790,000, but only $630,000 of that would be counted against the $177 million cap on the team's payroll. The league minimum for a rookie is $480,000. But according to the AP data, since the introduction of the 2011 collective bargaining agreement, the average amount of playing experience among the 1,700 or so athletes on opening day rosters has shrunk 3.3%. And the new contract terms did nothing to halt the exodus of players with 5 or more years under their belts. Most teams use around 50% of the cap on their 10 highest-paid players, one of whom is almoot always the quarterback. Rookie draft picks eat up between $5 million and $15 million. The 35 or so other players scrap for the rest, and that amount is drawn down by money paid to injured athletes and those no longer on the roster. The only position outside of kicker and punter that is trending older is, not surprisingly, quarterback, where average experience has risen since 2005 from nearly 4.8 years to 5.8. New England's Tom Brady, 41, is in his 19th season. Experience at other positions is declining. Positions widely seen as most replaceable, running back, linebacker, wide receiver and interior lineman, have seen some of the sharpest drops. A look at the two charts presented in the article above show that the current trend towards younger rosters coincides with the adoption of the 2011 collective bargaining agreement. While it took a couple of years for the effects to completely wash through, the trends seem obvious. There has been a sharp movement from older veterans to younger players, much more dramatic than in the past. Personally, I believe that the slotting system implemented by the current CBA was the prime driver behind the acceleration of this trend towards younger rosters. By artificially suppressing player wages for 4 years, the CBA has effectively turned all but the most talented players into disposable commodities to be replaced as soon as their rookie contracts are finished. My recommendation would not be to do away with the slotting system altogether, but to shorten drafted rookie contracts to just 2 years so that players have 2 seasons to establish their worth as NFL players, and exit their rookie contracts just when their value is approaching its peak, giving them an opportunity to grab a bigger piece of the salary cap pie, roughly half of which is currently dished out to the top 10 players on each team. A collection of recommendations from Over the Cap. Jason Fitzgerald and Vijay Natarajan from Over the Cap recently posted a series of articles in which they offered 9 proposals for the upcoming NFL collective bargaining agreement, explaining each recommendation in a separate article. They represent one view, and I don't necessarily agree with all the points offered, but they are well thought out and deserving of consideration on their merits. CBA Suggestion Number 1, reducing the length of rookie contracts to 2 years. This is the same suggestion that I championed in a recent article here on Hogs Haven. In fact, I used some of the arguments put forward by Fitzgerald. The original CBA more or less did what it was supposed to do for veterans from 1994 through 2010. You can see the rise in population of players 30 and older during that time frame. Starting in 2011, we see the big decline in the 30 age group. Notice that the sub-30 age group has remained relatively steady. We can argue all we want about the 2011 CBA, but changes that occurred there regarding salary cap minimums, rookie wage scales, and unlimited salary cap carryovers at the very least allowed teams to experiment with rosters purged of older players. Based on the trends they have liked the results, and no change is likely going to put the genie back in the bottle and see what happened between 1993 and 2010, where teams were more willing to have older players on the roster. But even more so than that, we were really only talking about a maximum of 30% of NFL rosters being older than 29. So while we can make a strong argument that a player's earning potential ends at 29, for the majority of players it ends much earlier. The players would solve so many problems if they can shorten rookie contracts. The franchise tag is a major problem because after 2 tags a player is likely going to be 28 or older. With shorter contracts we would likely cap off the first chance at free agency, even after 2 tags, at no older than 27. That's doable for a top-line player since they will still be considered in the prime of their career. Teams were already willing to guarantee huge numbers to rookies, and we can guarantee you that the percentage of contract guarantees should go up much higher when signing deals at 24 or 25 in free agency than 27 and 28. Getting to free agency at this age gets the player into free agency at the peak of his career. Players who may be good but not great are going to get raises, and you will likely see the rise of the middle class due to that, even if those players will likely be done by the time they are 27. At least in this case they get the raise they deserve off a rookie contract rather than having to play out the rookie deal and finding out there is little more than a minimum deal waiting for them by the time they hit free agency at 27. For elite players, this is going to not only give them one good chance at earning a contract but likely 2 major deals. Under this type of system you should get a chance to cash in at 25 and then again at 29 or 30 if you are still really effective. That first deal likely would carry a massive guarantee if extended or signed as a free agent. CBA suggestion number 2, revamp the rookie contract rules. Players who go undrafted sign mandatory 3-year, rather than 4-year, rookie contracts. Signing bonuses are not slotted, but a cap is put on each team so that they cannot use large signing bonuses for the players. However, in recent years more and more teams are guaranteeing high levels of salaries for undrafteds, essentially giving some a larger guarantee than players who were drafted in the 6th and 7th rounds. Undrafted players are allowed to be extended after just 2 NFL seasons rather than 3 NFL seasons. Finally, after the expiration of the player's contract, they are eligible to either be tendered at one of 3 restricted levels or to become a free agent. If you begin to play the money out, you will see that there are clear benefits that are available to players who go undrafted into a much lesser extent, sliding from late in the 2nd round of the draft into the 3rd round of the draft. It's very clear the issues that exist here. 3rd round draft selection has potential to out-earn the 2nd round draft pick, despite the fact that both may very well play at the same level. The UDFA has the potential to out-earn all but the top 42 or 43, a mid-2nd round selection, in the draft. That doesn't make any sense, especially when you combine that with the fact that they can also sign extensions earlier than anyone else. Fixing this should be relatively straightforward. All players should be eligible after their 2nd season to sign a contract extension. That puts UDFAs and draft picks on equal footing. It also gives every player an opportunity to push their contract issues earlier if they can't get rookie contracts completely knocked down to 2 years. A system like this would not only make certain that the early career earnings of the 1st round pick remain higher than others who are drafted lower and are PPE eligible, but would also put pressure on teams to extend players after their 2nd season. In the NFL, rather than paying out a large bonus that increases cap charges, wouldn't be used as a way to agree to fake guarantees when an extension is signed, and requires a large sum of cash to be paid early in a deal. CBA suggestion number 3, increase mandatory injury protection. The rules are spelled out in Article 45, injury protection, of the CBA, but the quick gist of it is that a player has 50% of his following year's salary up to a maximum of $1.2 million guaranteed in the 2019-2020 league years, for injury in the event a football injury renders him unable to play. Teams cannot evade any injury protection by releasing a player early. There is also an extended injury protection benefit that covers the second season after an injury up to $575,000. We believe the player's goal should be to increase this number in the next CBA and tie raises into the growth of the salary cap. Currently the injury protection raise amounts to just $25,000 a year, which kicks in every other year as it is stated in the current CBA. Had the number been tied to the cap, it would be at least $1.5 million in 2019 rather than $1.2 million. Still, there should be more protection than just $1.5 million. As a baseline number, the players should look to increase the maximums to $3 million for the year after an injury and $1.5 million for 2 seasons following an injury, while keeping the same 50% calculation to determine the actual amount. Growth in the numbers should be tied to the growth of the salary cap the same way RFA tenders, draft slotting, and franchise tags are also tied to growth in the cap. This should not be a difficult negotiation for the players, or something they should ignore. We think teams in general are more considerate now of the dangers of the game and would agree to ensure more protection in this regard for players. If you look at the growing number of injury-only guarantees agreed to in negotiations for free agents extensions, one can see that this is an area where NFL owners have been flexible. Partially we believe this is because injury guarantee payouts are a rare occurrence because of the high threshold to have the kind of injury that prevents a player from basically trying out for a team, but also because teams can take out insurance policies to cover such situations for expensive players. CBA Suggestion Number 4, raise league-wide and team minimum spending requirements. This is one area where I am not in strong agreement with over the cap, primarily because they are violating a key rule of negotiations. Fitzgerald and Natarajan are suggesting that the NFLPA negotiate for something they are, for the most part, already getting. Unless this is treated as an "oh, by the way" late adjustment to the CBA, it is a wasted effort. If the NFLPA asks for this, they will likely get it, but the owners will almost certainly extract a concession in return. The NFLPA would end up giving something away, and getting little beyond a paper victory in return. There are 2 cash requirements in the current CBA. The first is a league-wide spending requirement of 95% of the NFL salary cap over 2 4-year periods, 2013 to 2016 and 2017 to 2020. The second is that each team must spend to a minimum of at least 89% of the salary cap to make certain that the 95% number is not being met by a minority of teams. These numbers should not only be raised, but they must be raised significantly. A true movement by the NFL should be to come up from 95% league-wide spending to 103%. That number is only a 2% jump from where the NFL is right now, and 12 or 13 teams are already within striking distance of that number. Every team should be required to spend at least 100% of the salary cap in cash to bring those bottom teams up. If those 12 teams that were under 100% in the last 4 years were forced to spend 100%, the league would pretty much meet that 103% number without much trouble. While the NFL would argue that this is too big a jump from 95%, the fact is all it is requiring is for teams to spend about an extra $3.3 million per year from where they are now to hit the number. This would be a victory, but a small one. The NFLPA should put this right near the bottom of the priority list, if they prioritize it at all. CBA Suggestion Number 5, reinstitute salary cap minimum spending. While I will present OTC's argument here, I don't agree with it wholeheartedly. They describe the current situation as having more negative than positive effects, but I disagree. We are seeing a lot of flexibility for front offices in managing the salary cap, resulting in more roster movement, more trades, and more options in medium-term planning. In a league where, worst to first, it is the promise that makes every season worth watching, the current flexibility that front offices have is an important part of the equation, and I don't think that things will be improved by reducing the level of flexibility. OTC presents some information to rebut my worst to first argument, but I remain unconvinced by their logic. Feel free to click through to the article to read what they have to say on that issue and look at the statistical table they present. In the prior 2006 to 2012 CBA, teams were required to allocate a certain amount of costs to their salary cap every season. The 2011 CBA scrapped this rule in favor of allowing teams to carry over unlimited amounts of salary cap room to future seasons. The results, in general, had been more negative than positive. With teams having gigantic amounts of cap carryover compared to moderate amounts in the prior CBA, teams are finding it much easier to release players or decide to take a year or two off from the market, so they can load up at a later date. Teams have the ability to carry players on the franchise transition tag with no problems, giving them incredible leverage in negotiations. The salary cap was also designed to bring some parity to the league, and that is rarely happening these days, so if they want to make it meaningful they have to bring changes to it. Putting teams in a position where they have to use large signing bonuses to fit a player within the salary cap puts significant pressure on a team because of the dead money associated with the release. That pressure only exists if a team, however, is tight against the salary cap. When teams are looking at future ledgers with $50 and $60 million or more in cap room, the fact is there is no pressure. Our feeling is if teams were required to spend somewhere between 90 and 95% of the cap, meaning carryovers this year would not exceed $17 million, you would eventually see more players get to free agency and better overall structured contracts for the players, leading to a more competitive field of teams each year. CBA Suggestion Number 6, Salary Cap Amnesty Clause. I published an article on this question on Tuesday. Along with the first suggestion, shorter rookie contracts, I think this is the most important of the 9 recommendations put forward by Over the Cap in this series. This is an issue for the NFLPA because it creates an opportunity for players to truly double-dip against the salary cap. If a player is lost due to a catastrophic injury, a la Alex Smith in 2018, this proposal would see the player get paid 100% of his guaranteed money, but the team would get it reset on the salary cap. The only loser here would be the owner, who would have to pay the injured player and still pay out the restored salary cap money a second time, but this would be good for the players, good for competitiveness, good for fans, and good for the game. Just because Alex Smith provides a perfect example of a situation where this recommendation would apply doesn't mean that this is a Redskins issue, or that it represents an opportunity for bad management to get out of bad contracts. Recent big-dollar, long-term deals include Russell Wilson in Seattle and DeMarcus Lawrence in Dallas. A catastrophic training camp injury similar to the one suffered by Teddy Bridgewater a few years ago, or a Joe Theismann, Alex Smith-type injury that occurs during a game or events that can affect a team through no one's fault. This recommendation got a lot of healthy debate earlier this week, and many Hogs Haven readers are not